Okay, welcome to the next edition. We are back here with the fantastic Stephanie Hockman, who is going to share with us a lot of her expertise, or excuse me, some of her expertise around how to prep for those interviews. In particular, we're going to be talking about how to position yourself, how to answer the question, tell me about yourself, or walk me through your resume. I say it's the question that's asked in many forms, and if they don't ask it, they still want to know the answer to it. So you better be ready to deliver a polished answer. Most importantly, because it creates that key first impression. So, without further ado, Stephanie, tell us, give us a quick background and why you're a fantastic person to help our listeners develop this answer.
Ben, it's such a great opportunity to be here. I'm excited about this. I have spent over 35 years in the finance industry. I started my career at Arthur Andersen as a tax consultant to hedge funds and investment partnerships before I spent 15 years as an investment banker at Bank of America and BNP Paribas. But what I did at all three of those entities was run, or at least be very instrumental in the recruiting process for our interns and our analysts and associates. So did a lot of the recruiting mechanisms and asked that question oftentimes, tell me about yourself. I took that knowledge and spent 10 years at Amherst College, where I worked with millennials and Gen Zs, both students and alumni, helping them find successful careers in finance. And then this past year launched Alvista Loop, which is an executive coaching and talent development business. And I work with college students, early career professionals, mid-career, and even senior level professionals in every aspect, from personal branding, which is really the tell me about yourself question. It is working with them on executive presence and having gravitas and confidence, to, career coaching and how do they find that right position for them. So really excited to talk about tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume as a central question, because I do think it sets the stage for really creating not only a successful interview, but a successful career.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, with that, let's jump into it. So, as you just said, as we kicked it off with, this is such a critical question, and it's so critical. Everybody knows that it's coming. It's going to hit you in networking calls. It's going to come out in formal interviews, informal interviews, single interviews, super days. But what's the purpose behind that? What would you say? Like, what's the purpose of asking this question, and why is it so ubiquitous across the networking and interviewing process?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because when I talk with especially college students, but even early career professionals, they think of the question as it's just an icebreaker. It's something to get something started. When in actuality, it's a very strategic question that the finance industry asks. And they're really trying to assess what I think of as four main categories when they're asking that question. So it's not just chit chat. It's not just breaking the ice, but it's very strategic. So the four things I think of why do I ask that question? Why did I ask it as an interviewer? And one is cultural fit. Really, do they represent the type of person I can see sitting next to me at the desk for 18 hours a day or 12 hours a day? Do they have those traits and characteristics that are representative of our firm? So that can be everything from drive, enthusiasm, positive attitude, work ethic, resilience, client focus, whatever that is that the client is looking for that is representative of their firm. They're looking to see that you have those traits. The second thing they're assessing is really that motivation. Are you really there to get the job? Are you really motivated to be in the finance industry at that particular firm, at that particular position? Or are you really just chasing prestige? Are you chasing some sort of, following the herd, or this is what all the other people are doing, so I might as well do this? So they're really looking at motivation and do you really want to be there? The third thing I think they're looking at from this question is really your communication skills, right? I'm not being as succinct as you really need to be in the finance industry with this long-winded answer, but really what you need to be is concise and brief. The finance industry is extremely busy, and so you've got to be able to demonstrate strong communication skills. Are you concise? Are you logical? Do you have structure to your answer, or are you droning on and on and on, right? So we'll talk maybe a little bit later on some pitfalls, but communication skills is absolutely paramount. And then I would say the fourth thing that they're looking at is understanding, who you are as a person. What is your narrative? And that's really where you get the chance and the opportunity to really tell your story about how you fit within their organization, how your skills, experiences, characteristics are not only representing their firm in that position, but also that, here's the story of me. And one thing I really would love us to focus a little bit on in a minute is maybe that hook. I call it the UVP, your unique value proposition. And everyone has one, but you've got to convey that in your story, and it makes them want to ask even more questions. And if it's done right, the tell me about yourself question and the response you give will lead to a plethora of other questions for the interviewer. Instead of making it an interview, it ends up being a conversation if you do it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really can't I would say, I don't know if you can overemphasize it or not, but the hook and the uniqueness is so critical because this is your opportunity to distinguish yourself as the unique individual that you actually are. And I think a common mistake, at least that I see, and I'd love to hear what you think, is, people are trying to do the cultural fit, which means almost fitting into the box, but then they'll do so at the cost of ignoring some of the uniqueness that's in their profile and what makes them different. And so, what guidance would you give to someone who's maybe struggling with navigating that?
Yeah, I think, partly it's what I, encourage people to really think about is, what makes them authentic in who they are, right? When I oftentimes get asked by people, how do I get started with this answer? Do I start with, I was born here and I grew up here? And I'm like, no, stop. That's not a story. It doesn't need to be chronological history, biography by any sense. But it really needs to be sort of what I call R&R, reflection and research. So first of all, spend 30 minutes, spend an hour reflecting on who are you as a person? Who are your characteristics? Or what are your characteristics? What are your experiences? What makes you unique? And then do research on the positions. You've got to be able to talk about why that particular firm and why that particular position. So do research. Look at old job descriptions. They don't change year over year. And then look at the websites or in your networking calls with people, you'll find out information about the firm. What is their mission? What are their values? And then create a matrix of those three things. Who you are, what are they looking for in that particular position? And then what does the firm stand for? And create the narrative around that. But really, that unique hook that you asked about really is about authenticity and finding out and spending that time of reflecting on who you are. I'll give you a quick example. So I've been in the industry, as I said, over 35 years. But the tell me about yourself question, I still get asked when I'm meeting new people. And I love to talk about the fact that I grew up on a cattle farm in Oklahoma. And the first experience I had with finance is when I went with my grandfather to the cattle slaughterhouse, and I learned that I could get a new pair of tennis shoes if we got more prices for the price of cattle. And that actual finance cattle futures was sort of my entree into the finance industry at the ripe old age of 7. And I love telling that story, partly because it gives a very interesting visual, right,
Yeah.
of slaughtering cattle. That hopefully is that hook that will make them remember me in the end. But it also has a relevance to the finance industry and the way I really started thinking about supply and demand and the focus of the finance industry.
Yeah, well, that's well said. Great example too of something specific and unique to you. Like you said, that's memorable, but also has that little connection to finance. I mean, that's the balance you're looking for. You mentioned the importance of reflection, and to me, it's one of those pieces of advice that I think everybody hears, but it tends to go in one ear and out the other. And I think a lot of folks struggle with really physically, how do I do that? And so I guess I'd love to throw a suggestion out there and get your response to it. It's something that I would recommend to students in terms of how do I start to do the reflection is think about, what are some of those critical moments where you were maybe at your best or most successful and had accomplished something. It doesn't have to be something sensational like I won the national award or the state championship. It doesn't need to be that. But just think about that when you worked hard, you put your effort in something and your best strengths came out in that moment. What were you doing? Where were you? And what were those strengths? And then you can start to, and really, like you said, build a matrix. And I love that approach of documenting those things. and do it again, because there's going to be 3, 5, 7 examples of that, and though that will start to be the foundation of that story. So I guess, yeah, what do you think about that, and what would you add to that?
I think it's a great method. I think reflection is really hard for people. I'm a type A OCD sort of person, and to sit still for 30 minutes is really hard for me. So I think part of it is you've got to be disciplined, and you've got to really focus your efforts on spending time with yourself, which is not always comfortable, but growth begins at the end of your comfort zone. So get there. The other technique I've used with a lot of clients is do what I call a roadmap. Think back to very early years. When was the first time you took a risk? Was it taking off the training wheels of your bicycle? Was it learning to ride a motorcycle? Whatever it happens to be. And sort of create this roadmap of your life and all the different, peaks and valleys, right, that we've all gone through, or a split in the road, and what was some of the decision processes you made at those points in time. And those sort of decisive factors that influenced who you became can be another way to really reflect on who you are as a person and your authentic self.
Yep. No, well said. Well said. And to add to that, or explore, to zoom in on parts of what you just highlighted there, I would add, it's instead of thinking of your story as a sort of continuous, string that's going along steady as she goes for X number of years, instead think about it as a series of critical moments. And I think you did that really well with your story, because I can remember moments. If you're telling me a story and you highlight a moment, that pops out and is very memorable. Again, going to the cattle auction or the slaughterhouse, that's a key moment, and you can see how that key moment started to set the tone for the future. And so think, you've got to document what those critical moments are and focus on those, as opposed to, this role I had, or this club leadership position I had, or I was a participant in sports here. Instead, tell us about that key moment where you fell face first in the mud, and how did you pick yourself back up and adapt and learn from that setback. Those are some of the key moments that define you, that will make you unique and will be interesting to listen to for the interviewer.
Yeah. And I think one other piece of advice when you're thinking about the reflection is think about movies that you've gone to see or that you've streamed, right? It's what are those moments in the movie that you really remember? And right, there's something about that sticks with you. That's what you're trying to create when you're creating your response to this question, is a visualization of who you are for your listener, for that interviewer or the person you're networking with. You want to tell a compelling story that makes them want to follow up with additional questions, but more importantly, makes them remember you and visualize you in a certain way. And that's part of that personal branding we talked about.
Right. No, absolutely. Okay. Well, we covered some of the purpose behind what are you trying to accomplish, and just as a quick reminder, was cultural fit, really communicating, finding authentic ways to communicate that motivation of why you're here, demonstrating your storytelling ability, communication skills, because you will eventually be in front of clients, right? So they're picturing you in front of clients and how you can communicate, and then of course, wanting to learn more about you and your unique story. So those are some of the things we just covered. So to continue the conversation here, talk to us and tell the listeners about the mindset they should be bringing to that answer and to that moment when they get asked that question. How should they be thinking about crafting that response, and what mindset should they be bringing to that moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of when you're doing that initial reflection and research, right? The reflection part. What is it that you need to bring out in yourself? And so when you start to craft your answer, things that I think are really important from a mindset perspective is have confidence, right? The finance industry is one in which confidence is paramount. And oftentimes, not everyone feels super confident, but this is about you. You're telling the story of you. So have that confidence. Be able to tell the story of why you want to be at that particular firm or in that particular position. I think be authentic. We talked a little bit about that already, but I think that actually is extremely important, is really being yourself. Come to the table, come to crafting your answer from an authentic place. Because if you're trying to fit into a specific peg and then you're not the right cultural fit, then you're probably not going to be happy at that firm. That's why they ask
Hmm.
the question. So I think it's really important that if you're being inauthentic, you could get matched with a firm that you won't be happy with because you're being inauthentic in that situation. So I think authenticity and confidence are two really important things. I think a third thing that's extremely important is being concise and brief. Again, I think that goes to the communication skills. You've got to be able to be logical and provide enough detail, but don't go on and on and on about things, because I think that I get lost. Like I stopped listening. And to that point, I would say when you're thinking about the mindset that you want to be in, this is not a 3-minute answer. This is about a 90-second answer. And we'll talk a little bit about how you need to practice that. But
Right.
that really is important when you're thinking about being concise and brief. So if you're a 20, 21-year-old person going to your first interview and telling me about yourself, you've got to be able to distill the last 21 years and why you want to be in finance in 90 seconds, which is actually a lot longer than you think it is.
Right.
And then I would say the last thing you want to have in mind when you're coming up with your answer, that mindset, is really what is your hook? And then getting back to that, what is your unique value proposition? And what do you want to leave them with feeling? Because I think it's really about that visualization and the feeling that you're leaving your interviewer with as much as the content that you're going through.
Yep. No, absolutely. And there's so many people who tell me, "Oh, but there's nothing unique about me. I haven't done anything unique." And I say, I don't know, that's a bunch of hooey. I could say, all these different words, poppycock, right? No, that's not true. We know that that's not true. No matter, you just means you haven't thought about it enough. It means you haven't gone back. Ask people, hey, what's unique about me?
Yeah.
Ask
Well,
the 10 people who know you best and see what they say. You don't even have to do it by yourself, right?
Well,
Um,
a really fun exercise, just to go off that I
yeah,
do with my clients. It's a personal branding exercise, but I say go to 3 individuals, not 10. I think that's a little extreme, but go to 3 individuals. Maybe it's a family member, it's a friend, it's a former boss, or someone you work with at your school job, and
yeah.
ask them to describe you in 3 adjectives, 3
Hmm,
words. And then describe yourself in 3 words. And you've got 12 adjectives. And what I always find when I work with clients is that there's a pattern in that, right?
right.
They might call you driven or enthusiastic, but they're very similar, right? Or my favorite, I did this exercise as part of a executive education workshop at Harvard. And it was funny because my mom called me candid. A coworker called me a bull in a china closet. And another one called me trustworthy. But all of those
Hmm.
are words, basically I would say, no, I'm just a person that speaks my mind, right? But all of those are similar visuals that people have of me and the branding that I'm coming across, which is someone that doesn't mince words. So I
Well,
think that it's a great exercise for people to do maybe in that reflection period.
I feel like for you, I could add integrity, right? That's kind of what I hear, though, right? It's you're gonna see it, you're gonna call it like you see it,
Yeah.
and you're not gonna take any BS, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, what which so there's another piece here, because you mentioned confidence, and certainly that's critical.
Mhm.
What I also see, though, is I see that also being a really big pitfall for especially younger folks who are early in their career. They are told to exude confidence, but they actually haven't really, you might say, to some extent, they haven't earned it in a way, right? So I guess say more. What do you mean about confidence? Because what I know you don't mean is you don't mean that you need to have overconfidence about how great of a finance and M&A advisor you are to clients, right? That's not the kind of confidence we're talking about. So say more about the kind of confidence that you do want folks to tap into.
Yeah, and it's a fine line between confidence and what I call cocky, right? And sort of that
Yeah.
egotistical person. But in confidence, what I'm talking about is that ability to exude an understanding of what you know and what you don't know, right? A
Hmm.
confidence in what is my background and how have I learned things in the past. I can bring that same mentality to ABC firm or to the XYZ position. So it's that confidence in myself and knowing what I am able and capable of doing, not necessarily that overconfidence in I'm not going to go tell you that I know more than you do about a specific position. So I think it's more of a internal confidence. And what I
Yeah.
oftentimes tell people is you don't have to be this extrovert and over exuberant, confident person. The great thing about the finance industry is it is filled with all kinds of extroverts and introverts, people that are quietly confident versus overly confident and exuberant. And the thing about it is you have to be authentic in who you are. And if you are that person that you are sometimes not as outspoken as you feel like you need to be in an interview, because you do have to exude a level of confidence in your abilities, then work on some things that you can do to exude that confidence. My favorite thing is the power pose. Amy Cuddy put this together in a TEDx talk or a TED talk. And it was really about, putting, for me, it's the Superwoman pose, right? It's putting your hands on your hips and you're standing with your wide feet shoulder width apart. And you're just saying, I am going to be able to do this. And that allows me to go into a conversation with a bit more, my shoulders are held back, my chin's held high, and I'm just able to exude just a level of confidence rather than, it's more about how you demonstrate that confidence than it is necessarily about all that talking about what you know and don't know.
Right. Well, it's about how can I show confidence and balance that with humility. Mm-hmm. And you didn't use that word humility, but that's how I read a lot of what you're saying, and being comfortable. And I think that's the other word too. How we mean confidence here is a lot more about just being comfortable in your own skin, being comfortable knowing that you don't know all the answers, and being confident in your ability to work hard, to learn, to embrace this new profession, and to not make this, you're confident that you won't make the same mistake twice, right? Mm-hmm. Which is very different than I'm confident that I've learned all these amazing things at school and I'm going to bring all these skills on day one. That type of confidence will actually get you scratched off the list pretty quickly.
That's that cockiness that I think.
Yeah, and that's how it gets interpreted.
Oh,
and
it
rightfully
absolutely
so.
does. And that's typically in that cultural fit that we talked about, not the type of person they want to work next to.
Right. But I one of the things, it's just important that the listeners get, like, there's this healthy tension between these things. And that's ultimately what makes this so difficult, why we're talking about it, is because you have to navigate these tensions between these different things you're trying to show, which is tricky. And that's why we're talking about it.
Yeah. And I guess I would just reiterate that in confidence, or when you're trying to exude confidence, it is mostly nonverbal content. It's that body language that helps you demonstrate confidence than anything that you're actually saying. I think what you say is important, but the way you represent yourself is really how you demonstrate confidence.
That's a good point. If you find yourself saying, I am very confident, that means that you did it wrong. I'll tell you that right now. You should, if you find yourself saying something like that means that, you missed the mark. You need to show it. That actually kind of communicates lack of confidence, quite frankly. Yeah. So, okay. Well, so moving forward, it's important to, help folks start to think about the how. And a lot of talking heads and instructors and people giving advice, they love to talk about the what. What do you need to do? But at the end of the day, if you don't know how to do it, what's the point? So let's dig into the how. So we mentioned some of the reflection pieces of some ways you get started, but let's go deeper into that. And what guidance or what techniques do you bring to your former students and your clients in terms of the how do I start to build this response and start to structure this? Yeah,
and I would say, that matrix that we talked about earlier becomes really important, right? Sitting down, and you're only doing that really once, right? You only need to reflect on yourself once. You can reflect on the position and do some research about the position and research the different firms. But once you've created that matrix, then how do you start to craft that story, right? That narrative of yourself. And what I would say is best tactic is to go what I call past, present, future, right? Mm-hmm. You want to briefly summarize your background, your education, your early experiences, the skills that you've learned from, whether it's academic courses, but also, if you took Adventus, you have financial acumen, right? But those sort of things, and what led you to the finance industry. And then really talk about all the present things that you're doing, right? What have you been doing in your current coursework, in your activities, that sort of thing, to craft why you really want to be at that particular firm and in that particular position. And then future, really, where can you see yourself at that firm? And, there used to be this question, where do you see yourself in 5 years, that no one asks anymore, especially in the finance industry. But I do think it's important for you to demonstrate in the future, explain why you're excited about that company. Why are you excited about that particular opportunity? And, let's say you're interviewing at an investment bank. I don't think you want to say, well, I want to be here so that I can immediately go into private equity. That's not the right answer. That is not the right answer. But you can talk about wanting to build skills and be contributing to client deals and being able to, help your associate out or your VP out so that their workload is less. Those sort of things, and understanding the position and how they can see you fitting into the firm is really important. So I think that first tactic is really kind of crafting the story, the narrative from the past, present, and the future.
Well, so can you elaborate on, because I can hear some of the questions that students will have popping up in my mind, and certainly there's an inherent importance of setting the foundation for why you're in front of them in that moment, and why are you interested in this very difficult path in finance. But also, that's not the question they asked, right? Because we also know in the interview, what are they going to ask next? It's like the three questions that I guess are like, tell me about yourself, why banking, why this bank? And so you're going to get those questions. So how do you navigate that? Say more about that. Like you want to lay the foundation, but you don't necessarily want to answer the question before it's asked, or do you?
Yeah, I would actually say that if you do the tell me about yourself question correctly, you're answering all three within the same. So you're customizing your narrative to not only who you are as a person, your background, and what you've been doing to set yourself up for this role. But then you're also tailoring it. That's going back to that research component, tailoring it to the particular position. So that tells you the why investment banking or why sales and trading. And then also that research on that particular firm and why that firm. And so if you know that the firm really values driven, work ethic, client-focused individuals, you want to tailor your answer to talk about that particular, how you as an intern or as an analyst would be driven to put the best sim together, pitch book together in order to do client work that will help out the team and the revenue generation of that firm. So it's really talking about all three components rolled up into one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I hear that. Yeah, I've just I think that's, if I was a student, I'd just be overwhelmed. I'm supposed to do that in 90 seconds. Oh my goodness, right?
Well, it's part of the practice, right? You have to, you're going to write, I oftentimes work with students or alumni and early career professionals. I'm like, well, are you a person that writes an outline or are you a person that writes a prose, right? Do you write out an essay or are you just an outline? It doesn't matter what you do, but you've got to be doing that. And then you're practicing it and practicing it. And you've probably got multiple versions. I've got probably at least 10 different versions of the tell me about yourself. And I'm customizing that depending on who I'm talking to, right? And that can be, if I'm talking to an early career professional, that's going to be a different conversation than if I'm talking to a managing director at a firm, right? And talking about all this. So the same thing is true when you're doing the tell me about yourself. You really want to focus in on the traits and characteristics that are going to resonate with an analyst or an associate, right? And how you'd be a great intern for their team if you're talking to them. And you're going to focus a bit more on cultural fit if you're talking to a managing director. And so you've got to craft these stories and these narratives, but you're going to have multiple iterations of them. And so it can feel overwhelming, but maybe start by writing a massive master document, kind of like you might have a master resume, and then start crafting different versions for who you're talking to. Are you talking to a managing director? Are you talking to an experienced professional? You're talking to an early career professional in the interview. And you're going to talk about things slightly differently because great example is financial acumen, right? And Adventus being a great opportunity to talk about financial acumen. You know what? Managing directors probably could care less whether you could do a discounted cash flow model. They assume that you can, or you wouldn't have made it to a super day stage where you're talking to a managing director. But the associate you're talking to wants to know about your financial acumen, your ability to create a discounted cash flow model or an LBO model. So you're going to talk more about your financial acumen with an analyst or an associate in an interview, and more about how you really see yourself helping clients when you're talking to managing director. So I think it's that know your audience and customize it.
Yeah, that's a great point. There really is a a great opportunity to make some of those fine-tuning adjustments, customizations, especially as you just to reinforce what you said, which is know what are one of those key traits that are part of the culture that bank views as helping to make them successful. And then find that key moment in your background when you exemplified that trait and work that in. And maybe you do have two or three different versions of that, or maybe or maybe you have a unique one for each bank and it's a little bit different because no, you can't recruit for 25 banks, right? So maybe you're recruiting for 5 to 7 and you do have 5 to 7 slightly tailored versions. That would not be unreasonable. So that's the level of effort that you need to be putting in, right,
Absolutely.
to this question because it's so key. Yeah. Okay. Oh, great. Um, So you mentioned you did jump through sort of that past, present, future structure. So I guess can you? So I think we've got the past and covering those key moments, and the present is a little bit more like what are you doing right now at school in terms of some of your activities, key moments, or skills. I guess what about the future? What recommendation would you say in terms of how to frame the future? I know you touched on this a little bit, but um, yeah, I mean, who knows how long you're going to be at the bank? Like you said,
Well,
you don't want to say, well, I'm going to be in that first private equity recruiting class that starts about 3 months after I start at your bank. So avoid that. But but you also don't want to say, or do you? I'm going to be a managing director and I'm going to be here for 20 years. I guess what do you think is the best way to talk about some of those longer term or future
yeah.
goals?
Well, I think part of what you've done when you were getting in the right mindset, and reflecting on who you are as a person and what authentically do you really want, what's important to you. You're bringing that to the future question, right? It is, I want to build a toolkit. I want to build skills
Mm,
that will add value to XYZ firm. I think those are really the things they're looking for. And
right.
then, you don't have to have your career mapped out, right? Everybody thinks that they've got to say, I'm going to do X and then Y and then Z. And in reality, you're going to change so much, especially for our early career professionals. Your 20s is a time of immense growth, and your career, what you think is going to be your career is going to change. So I don't think you have to commit to a specific future, but you have to commit to learning and commit to whatever it is the firm is really going after, which,
Yeah.
especially investment banks, they're looking for client focused mentality and they're looking for revenue generation. And you're not going to be a rainmaker as an analyst, right? That's not your job. But understanding how the analyst role plays into that revenue generation is an important concept to bring into the future, aspect of your narrative.
Right, right. Yeah, that's so well said. I just want to reinforce that it's not about saying your career goal in terms of titles, right? In terms of roles. It's about stating your goal in the medium term over the next few years in terms of skills that you want to build, in terms of exposures you want to get, and start saying, I want to build a middle market M&A skill set within the industrial sector. Just say that as a goal. And with that, there's a lot of things that you can go do with that. That could set you up for any number of different quote positions or titles. But that's just something. And again, we're focused. The other subtle reason I love that approach is it actually highlights humility because you're not starting out saying that I already have all this and you're lucky if you hire me. You're actually saying, no, I'm here to learn. I'm here to build. I'm here to grow. And that's my goal. So you're talking about your goals, but you're actually subtly reinforcing these elements of what should be cultural fit, this idea of humility and coming in to learn. No, that's I appreciate that approach. Um, so So yeah, I guess let's keep going in terms of some of these tactics around crafting the response. We did talk before this a little bit about transitions and highlighting that hook. And so, what would you add to that in terms of how to handle the transitions from these different key moments in our lives as we tell our story, and how and when do we work in that hook?
Yeah, I would say to most people, think about the 2-page essay you have to write in college, right? You've got to be succinct and to the point. but you've got a theme that travels through it. And so when you think about those transitions between the past, the present, and the future, there needs to be a theme, right? So when you're doing the reflection exercise and who you are as an authentic person, what is it that you think is the theme that drives you? And then use that theme as your transition points throughout. So, when we go back to my great example of growing up on a cattle farm, right? I always use as my transition the things I learned from being on a cattle farm, the work ethic, the waking up early and the drive and the requirements that it took to, move 200 head of cattle to the slaughterhouse, right? And so I would use that as my transition points, talking about the work ethic that I learned on the cattle farm that then took me to being able to get my bachelor's and master's degree in 5 years, that then took me to being president of the business council at the University of Texas, that then helped me transition into wanting to run analyst and associate programs at Arthur Andersen or Bank of America, because it was part of who I am in that drive that I have. So it's those connecting points and that theme that you want to come up with and use that as your narrative and that storyline. And it's that through line and your essay that when you write it out is what it is driving all those transition points.
Yeah, I loved how you phrased that. It's not so much about when you go from point A to point B, it's not about what you're moving away from, it's about what you're going to. And so what I heard in your response just now is like, I learned this drive, and that's what led me to seeking out this role as the leadership of, the business organization and so forth. And so I just want to reinforce what you just said for everyone. Really focus on those transitions of why were you running to something? Why were you drawn towards that next step? And that will help provide, you'll do so in the context of where you came from. But said the other way, you want to avoid saying, I ran away from this bad situation and went into this better situation. Avoid that and instead talk about why are you running to something versus running away from something.
Yeah, it's very much future looking throughout the entire narrative. Absolutely.
Yeah, even when you're talking about the past.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Well, let's keep. I love to bring things back to the practical, back to the tactical. So, what are some of these pitfalls? What are some of the watch outs, the things that can go wrong, and how do we avoid them?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what are those 4 things that the investment banks or the interviewer or the person you're talking to is really kind of looking for. And part of that was that communication skills we talked about. And with that needs to be brevity. One of the biggest pitfalls, and I walk through and do mock interviews with people all the time, the worst thing is to tell me about yourself in 5 minutes or 4 minutes. And you just go on and on and on. So
for 7 minutes.
7 minutes. The interview's 30 minutes. You need to be brief. It needs to be about 90 seconds, 2 minutes on the outset. So I think that timeline or the timing of it is one of the pitfalls. It can either be too long or people just make it too short and you're just, I was born in Oklahoma and I went to the University of Texas and now I want to be in finance. That's way too short. You're not telling a narrative. You're not giving me a story. You're just giving me the highlights, right? I need a little bit more of a short documentary, not a commercial. But it needs to be about 90 seconds. So I think length is one of the biggest pitfalls, both either too long or too short. I would say another pitfall. No,
before you go on, staying on length for a second, so I think this is critical for folks to understand the bigger picture here. When you sit on the other side of the desk on the interviewer, you have probably either a list of questions that you and your team have come up with or something you got from HR that you literally are required to fill out. Mm-hmm. And you have 30 minutes to do it. So as a candidate, you need to be aware of that. And if you take too long in one answer, you're going to quite frankly be preventing your interviewer from getting to all the questions that they need to get to, which is only going to reflect negatively on you. So it just reinforces Stephanie's point of the brevity and succinctness. Use that 90 seconds to 2 minutes. If you're in that range, you've got 27 minutes to let them ask a follow-up question, let them probe into something, and let them still get to everything they do. If that first answer is 7 minutes, you might think it was your best performance ever, but they didn't need most of that information, and now you've actually prevented them from finishing their interview, which is not going to look good.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I said in the very beginning is this, interviews are conversations. They're not meant to, be your monologue in any way, shape, or form. So it needs to be a conversation. on that point, actually, I have had students and young professionals ask me, well, how do I wrap up the tell me about yourself question, right? And so
Hmm.
there's one way, which is talking about the future and ending on, this is why I want to work at ABC firm, right? Another way to wrap it up and lead into a conversation is to say, and that's why I want to work at ABC firm, but I know I gave you quite a few examples, and my response, is there anything you'd like to go deeper on? And you're actually opening it up for them to ask you questions back, and it makes it feel more colloquial than an interview.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Without making it feel like a laundry list of,
Yeah,
ticking
exactly.
ticking through these resume bullets.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, kind of maybe going back to your original question, Ben, which is what are some of the pitfalls? So length is one, repeating what's on your resume is another one, right? And so maybe this is a great time to say there is a difference between asking, walk me through your resume and tell me about yourself. Walk me through your resume is, yes, you're going to hit all of the things on your resume or the majority of them and connect those back to why you want to be at the firm and why in that position. But the tell me about yourself question is also one in which you want to tell your narrative, but it should highlight things on your resume, but you don't need to repeat everything that's on your resume. You really want to pick out the things on your resume that highlight things in the theme that you want to give in your response to tell me about yourself. So I think it's important, pitfall is, well, I went to University of Texas at Austin, and then I went to Arthur Anderson, then I went here, 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 and it was just a chronological, deluge of things that you are saying. And that's not really a narrative versus highlighting, well, I worked with hedge funds and investment partnerships, or I worked as an investment analyst at Bank of America and why that was so important. So I think it's really picking the highlights from the resume versus repeating verbatim the bullet points on the resume.
Right, exactly. Well, because that's right in front of them, and generally the resume, but also what doesn't the resume cover? Like you said, the why. Like what's the real story behind this? We can see the positions and the titles and the awards, but what's the real why? Like you said, what's the driving force that the red thread that kind of goes through all of this to make it make sense?
Yeah, it's your elevator pitch or your sales pitch on why you want to be here and why they should want to work with you at that particular firm in that particular position.
Yeah.
And to that point, I think, another pitfall is they make it too generic, right? I remember at BNP Paribas, I would interview, on a given super day, we'd have 12 candidates coming in. And really you had to think about what distinguishes one person from the other. And oftentimes it's that hook, that visualization that they come up with. But the ones that made me basically go get a cup of coffee or a Red Bull afterwards is the ones that were too generic, right? They sounded like everyone else. So it really needs to be personalized and customized. And, we talked about having different versions of that, which if you're in a super day, if you're the candidate and you're in a super day, just as if you're the interviewer, you're hearing yourself say the same thing over and over. But if you'll actually customize it to the person and the position they're in, it actually will, be more interesting for you to give your story, right? But more importantly, it will be more interesting for the person hearing it on the other end. So I think, personalize it. Don't make it too generic. Don't repeat bullet points on your resume. That's just boring. Make it more of a narrative. And then the last pitfall I think that I would talk about is irrelevant details, right? And you could argue in my case that the cattle farm is an irrelevant detail, right? It may seem so if I just said, I grew up on a cattle farm, right? But if you actually bring it into and fold it into the narrative of why it brought in my interest in finance at an early age, it doesn't become irrelevant. But the pitfall is you add all these, well, and I also was a member of XYZ, ABC, and EFG. Okay, what's that got to do with finance? What has that got to do with this position? So don't bring in things because you think you need to regurgitate everything that's on your resume or everything about yourself. It's the highlight reel, right? It's that short-term documentary versus the long-term form.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to me, I love to come back to these inherent tensions that are there. And I think you've highlighted another one is you want to talk about uniqueness, but it also has to be relevant to the traits you're trying to communicate and the culture and these different goals that you have. And so your cattle example was a good one because while it is unique, you made it relevant by talking about the why and connecting it.
Mhm.
But I can see someone saying, well, you know, I won a surfing competition that shows my drive, determination, and these good traits, and I also love watercolor painting. And then they just move on to the next thing, right? And you're just like, whoa, okay,
But
that was your real, right? And that is example, like you failed to achieve that balance because the watercolor, you didn't talk about the why. How does that make you a better banker? I think you could find a way. It's there. But you have to actually do it. You can't just throw out these kind of red herring, this kind of, unique piece and then move on. That's where you kind of get into the irrelevant side. Is that fair?
yeah, it absolutely is. And I think the irrelevant details that people throw in there demonstrates that characteristic that you can't communicate logically and succinctly,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
so it goes back to that one of the
A
things
little
that
scatterbrained.
yeah, they're judging you on, right? Are
Yeah.
you logical and able to see something through to the end, but in a logical, concise format? So I think the irrelevant details really is a pitfall, but it's also a telltale sign to the interviewer or the person you're talking to that your communication skills are lacking.
Yep. Yep. And just the last thing I would add to that before we go on is it's only irrelevant because you made it irrelevant,
Mm-hmm.
right? You didn't provide the context. You didn't connect it to that red thread that tells your story as to why you're sitting in front of that person. So it's not the detail that's irrelevant. It's actually your usage of that particular thing that made it irrelevant. So I challenge you, bring in those unique things, but connect it to the story. You've got to do both. And if you just do one without the other, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And that's why it's tough.
Yep.
But okay, well, look, we've covered a lot of really core key pieces of information. It's still a lot to digest, and folks, we're going to have this is going to take time. I think people should set expectations. When I was going through business school, I have to say I must have spent at least 10 hours. I mean, in total, if not 20 hours, from reflecting, documenting, writing things out, doing it in the mirror, talking to folks, testing it out on networking calls. So just to set expectations, this is not something you're going to come up with in an afternoon, in an hour, and be ready to go. So really set those expectations
Mm-hmm.
about how much work you have to put in. But what other advice, what
Yeah.
other wrap up items did you want to make sure that we cover
Yeah.
before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would say actually three things. One, building on what you just said, it isn't, something that can be done even in a weekend. I actually think it takes lots of time and iterations, and
Right.
you're constantly adjusting it. I mentioned earlier I have 10 different versions of this. These are not the same 10 I had when I was in my 20s, right? You're constantly adjusting what you're telling people based on your experiences that are going through. So it is a work in progress, and it is a constant work in progress. The second piece of advice I'd have is take what you're learning about yourself when you're crafting this answer and create a personal brand around it, right? We talked a little bit about this at the beginning. This is what it is. It is who you want to be known for, right? So I oftentimes will work with, say, a student athlete, and we'll go through and say, okay, what do you want to be known for? Is it your competitiveness, your drive, whatever it happens to be? And then we'll make sure that not only is a theme that is through the response to tell me about yourself, but then it's also a reflection in their LinkedIn post or their LinkedIn profile. It is, the picture that they're using. It isn't the one of them in their football or lacrosse or basketball uniform, right? It's a professional photo. So what do you want to be known for, and incorporate that into your personal brand? And then the third piece of advice I would say is have some fun with this, right? If you are not having fun talking about why you want to be in finance, then really think about, do you want to be in finance? Because if this is, a chore for you, and spending 10 or 20 hours thinking about your story and your narrative is something that you just keep putting off, you're procrastinating, I think that is a telltale sign in and of itself. But if you're having fun being able to craft different versions of this, I think that says a lot about it being the right fit for you.
Well, if I could elaborate on that, yeah, I like that. Have fun. I haven't given that advice, I have to say, but I like that a lot. And I would say too, if you're not having fun telling your story, then definitely reevaluate your career objectives. But also, I would say reevaluate what parts of the story you're telling.
Yeah.
You want to tell, if you're telling the story, what you think you need to say to sound good is to tell about the most boring parts of your life that you hate, then yeah, we something is off here, and either you're going down the wrong career path, or you're just not doing a good job of putting together the "tell me about yourself"
Yeah.
answer,
No,
and
I think
instead refocus on those things that give you that natural energy and find ways where that connects to the traits that the bank wants to see. Um,
absolutely. I think that's so true. And when I was interviewing candidates and when I do mock interviews in preparation now, you can tell when people are excited to talk about why they're there, right? They're
yeah,
smiling, they're exuberant. It just comes through the enthusiasm. And then you want to have a conversation with them. If you are really struggling to bring that energy and enthusiasm to the response, then chances are I'm not going to want to hire you. So you've got to make sure that it's the right fit for you. So
yeah,
have some fun.
yeah, exactly. Um, but that said, you're not going to get out of answering this question
No.
kind of no matter where you go. So it can't be, so you might have to force yourself and figure out a way to get over the procrastination hump. Like that's something we all have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but definitely think really good advice to take a hard look at. Because ultimately, one of this, I mean, I would say the hidden secret here of this question is the banks want you to come to them when you've already come through this journey of reflection and thinking hard about your background. That's one of the real purposes, I would argue, is they don't want someone who hasn't thought about it, who's just on the conveyor belt, doing what everyone else is doing, saying what need, parroting everybody else and repeating what they're supposed to say. They don't want that. They want people who have done the hard reflection, have done the hard work. And that's the real purpose in asking this question is so that they can have you demonstrate that for them, that you have indeed done this reflection and you've come to a good place. And I can tell you from being sitting, and I'm sure Stephanie would agree with this, having sat on the other side of the table, if you see 100 of these, it's so easy to see the people who have done the work and done the
Mm-hmm.
reflection and are coming through in a natural, fun, energetic, and authentic way. It just screams, greatness in terms of an answer. Whereas those who haven't, you won't know it at the time. And in the interview or in the networking call, they're going to smile and nod and they're going to be polite and they're going to say, thank you, you did a great job. But actually, they know immediately that you didn't do the hard work. So that's so get in there and do it, and it'll be a great outcome no matter what, even if that outcome is I'm actually going to go into consulting or some other career path as well.
Yeah.
So excellent. Okay, well, thanks so much, Stephanie. This has been fantastic. I know our audience is going to get a ton out of this, and thank you so much, and definitely reach out if anyone has any questions, and yeah, as any final comments that you want to make before we wrap up?
No, I think we hit all the highlights that I really wanted to emphasize, and I really appreciate being able to share a little bit about not only my journey from the cattle farm to finance, but
There we go. That's a book title. That's your
farm to
biography title
finance.
right there.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, no, but I think it's a really great topic, and I'm glad we were able to cover it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Stephanie, and wishing you the best with Vista Loop and all the great work that you are doing and will do with clients on their journeys. So,
Thanks, Ben.
okay. All right.